If the thought of abstract painting intimidates you, then this is a perfect place to start. We're going to play around with some fun techniques to paint a loose, summery floral. I start out with one of my favorite ways to create a background using acrylic ink and alcohol. And I end up covering most of it up, but it's still a great way to play around and get the tension of tackling an abstract out of my brain. Then I use lots of different types of marks along with layers of color to slowly build the shapes of the roses. I even try out some stencils for fun. This painting is all about experimenting, having fun, and playing outside the rules and lines. Of course, the full lesson goes into much more depth on the techniques and products I'm using, and you can watch my full lessons by joining my Patreon. I'll put the link in the description. Now let's head over to the easel and get dusty. Well, before we actually get dusty, we're going to play around with acrylic ink. And I use acrylic ink instead of alcohol ink because it doesn't fade and it's a much more opaque and impactful pigment. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of randomly dripping the acrylic ink onto my paper and then using a paintbrush and just swiping them around. And what I'm really trying to do here is just create kind of an abstract, soft background in these colors, these cool blues. And I am using white because I don't want the colors to be too dark. So one thing I found is if you put the white on top, you can really lighten up those colors. So it minimizes the number of colors you actually have to buy. So after I get all of the inks down, then I go through with some rubbing alcohol, and I'm using 91%, and I'm just spritzing it on the paper or flicking it on with my fingers and letting it dry. And this is creating just some really cool kind of speckling and mottled effects. Okay, now we can get dusty. So for the bulk of this painting, you'll see that I am just really focusing on just some loose marks. And especially in the beginning stages here, as I'm starting to kind of establish the shape of these individual flowers and the direction that they're facing. These are all roses, by the way. And to me, roses are very much a series of kind of interlocking lines as kind of the base. And then depending how detailed I want to get, obviously you can add a lot more detail. But as you see here, I'm just really just putting those lines in that represent kind of the way the petals are, they kind of spiral in on each other. And then some of the buds at the top aren't all the way opened. And I'm layering a few different shades of orange or peach and yellow because I think they're a really nice contrast with that background, that cool blue and slightly purple background. And then just for fun, I'm bringing in some stencils and I'm using some pan pastels and the little tool there to just put some stencil marks on here. I just wanted to experiment with them a little bit before I really started putting in the leaves and the rest of the greenery just to see what I could create. And I'll put links to these stencils in the description if it's something you're curious about. All right, back to our pastels. So I'm just going to keep putting in marks for my flowers. And as you can see, I'm using some darker tones there to create a little bit of depth and some shadows. And then coming back over it with this brighter, deeper orange, which is a really nice complement to the background. My greenery, I'm keeping very loose and I'm not worrying too hard about where the edges of my flowers are. As you can see, getting a lot of overlapping there. And then using one of my favorite techniques here, which is rolling. So I'm rolling my pastel to create just some random lines around the petals just to give it a little more of an organic feel. Now coming in with a brighter yellow and emphasizing the edges of the petals and the shape and the direction of those petals with a much stronger, bolder mark. Of course, I go much deeper into all the techniques I use in this lesson inside my Pastel Growth Studio on Patreon. My members not only get full lessons, but also full product evaluations, step-by-step how-tos for your most pressing pastel questions, fun monthly challenges, and behind-the-scenes looks. I would love to welcome you to the family. I'm offering a 7-day free trial, and it's only $5 a month after that. I'll put the link in the description. Now, as I continue putting the background in, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really worrying too hard about the specific edges of the flowers, and I'm letting that greenery overlap it. Just like in a bouquet, you're going to have some of the greenery in front of your flowers. Now, I'm going to slow it down here because I want you to see the technique that I'm using to create these leaves and this greenery. It's a very loose kind of swiping, flicking motion, and it's helping me to stay loose in my head as well as on the painting. And then I'm just bringing in some other shades of green just to create a little bit more interest and contrast. And then once I get the greenery pretty much where I want it, I will come back in and redefine some of the edges of these flowers where I got a little too carried away with the green. But all in all, I think this is a really fun way to paint, just kind of flicking and swiping and throwing pastels onto paper. So let me know what you thought of this. Hopefully you enjoyed the lesson, and I would love to see you over on Patreon. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Take care.